Welcome all. My name is Matthew Glezos. I am one of the co-founders of Toronto DAO and the regular host for our weekly space. We have Anna here who's managing all the technical stuff. So if you want to ask a question at the end, Anna will be in charge of that. And we have another core team member of Toronto DAO here with Maria. How's it going, Maria? Thank you so much for doing this.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, me too. So just for some background, a lot of you may know Maria from her time with Clubhouse, which hosted a lot of Web3 and crypto events. And it was a fantastic space. And we're so lucky to have her with Toronto DAO. We did one event before she joined, and there was all this stuff that we didn't even think of, and she fixed that all right up. So it's fantastic to have her. So all the amazing events that we've had, you have her to thank.
Thank you so much for that entry.
So you've been in event planning for a while now, as I mentioned, Clubhouse. What led you down this path?
So it's interesting because my event planning, I guess, started a lot longer. I think this is what I've been doing most of my life, because prior to creating Clubhouse, I basically was working with a network company, which is basically direct sales. And if anybody is familiar with that, once you've done direct sales or any form of network marketing, you have thick skin like a rhinoceros. And you're also aware of how important it is to keep up, communities and events. So I feel like that's where I've learned a lot about hosting large seminars, putting things together, and then eventually Clubhouse became a space that I wish we would have had when I was hosting business conferences. So I mean, really, I think this is event planning and organizing is what I've been doing pretty much my whole life since I was
That's
20.
good stuff.
Yeah.
And, tell me about Clubhouse a bit and your experience with it. I just thought it was a fantastic venue. It had really cool vibes. I really enjoyed I've been to a few events there and I really enjoyed my time there.
So, and thank you for saying that. Clubhouse was actually, and I think for a lot of us, and by the way, I must say the reason that we were forced to close that location was because the building itself became unstable. It's an older building on Yonge Street, and we ran into a capacity issue where we couldn't host, or we didn't know how many people we can host upstairs for the structural integrity of the building. But itself, I know, and it's quite frustrating because then you come into a real estate issue. However, from a business perspective, and what we've been able to create at Clubhouse was so beautiful in terms of seeing how communities can develop given the right space and the right factors. So really what brought us together when we moved into Yonge and Bloor, that big venue that you're familiar with, and the reason we called it Clubhouse was because prior to that, I owned a fitness facility. So I've always been in health and wellness most of my life. And we realized that by having a space or like a third space, that's where people can come and just really either feel at peace or find their community or their social belonging. So in the end, it was almost like people came to the gym or the fitness club, the boutique gym we had to hang out. To work out, but they were staying and sticking around just to hang out. And then we started throwing everything like movie nights or game nights, or I'm a huge fan of charades and board games and that kind of thing. And as young professionals, there isn't really spaces where you have a space like that almost, and I don't want to say to feel like a kid, but to a place where you could just come in and honestly hang out. And we noticed that that was a big need that the community had. So it wasn't just a fitness center, so it naturally developed into something that had so much more. And then we went into creating it to have seminars and business meetings and things of that sort that just kind of broadened our scope of what we were doing. So that's kind of how it all started, with friends getting together and taking this business further than what it was.
That's cool. It sounds like, so you have all these social clubs and they're all very prestigious, right? They're We have probably the most famous example here in Toronto is called the Granite Club. I don't know if you're familiar with that place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a ridiculous amount of money, like entrance fee, and you have to. It's not enough to have the money. You have to go to these like parties, and the club members have to be like, all right, this guy passes the vibe test, and it's very pretentiousy. Somebody, the average Joe can't just go and do that, and it sounds like you're trying to provide uh, a place for those people that would not have any chance in hell of getting into the Granite Club.
It's interesting you say that because so another club that we kind of joked that we were like the not the anti, but like there's a different. I'm thinking of Soho Club, for example, where I have a lot of my friends attending, and it's an international community, and it's great. Or like the Granite Club, or places that are exclusive, which is fine because that's their business model. In our case, because we are so ground up, we always prided ourselves on being the most exclusive because we didn't market really. There was no marketing. The most exclusive, inclusive club. And as long as people were, had basic integrity and genuine care for other humans, like that was enough to enter. And I think I'm almost allergic to the saying, maybe it's because I came an immigrant in middle school and I was bullied, but I really like,
Huh.
I am anti, the concept of you can't sit with us. Like we're too cool for you. And that like, to me that's one of the things that I think I've wanted to witness, and I witnessed through Clubhouse, was how people can interact regardless of their background, their social economic status, how much they have or how much education they have or where their background is. And I think that's what made the club so beautiful, for all of us, because it was just like a giant living room, and we always joked it was Friends meets Rent, because it was literally like the vibe of Friends, except um, a little bit more real life towards understanding people's different dynamics and where they come from. And there was never a place of judgment. And I feel like that's one thing that if we could prove it could work on a small scale inside that community that we had, where there was tolerance, there was respect, to all literally religions, ages. Like our youngest person was 18 years old, our oldest person on our crew was 65. Some people had degrees, some people didn't even finish whatever they were finishing, so none of that mattered. So I feel like if that was extrapolated to like a grand scheme of things, it really is possible, but to understand what made that work, that's a whole different journey, right? Like that's the learning, we all learn from everything. So yeah, that to answer your question, yeah, that's definitely the most inclusive, exclusive club. And it became known as this place where we never marketed and people just brought their friends. And then we decided to develop and support all sorts of different projects within the club. And that's kind of what the idea was, to facilitate growth and exchange and just provide like literally a couch for people come to work and hang out with and feel better. But I think we'll talk about the mental health aspects of that in the mission a little bit later on. So
Yes. That's all good stuff. So, like as I've already mentioned, you help are a big part of planning our events with Toronto DAO. We have monthly events. We did skip May just to not deal with the competition of consensus, and I feel like everyone was evented out after consensus. I might as well, what do you call it? Plug in our events. That's on the 25th. It's going to be in the Art Gallery and Distillery District. So be sure to sign up for that, as space is limited. But that being said, like, how do you see our events at Toronto DAO? How are they important for the city?
well, and that's the part I love about working with Toronto DAO and coming into this community. And thank you for being so kind and welcoming to me. I think for a lot of us, and I mean, people, some are extroverts, some are introverts. We all have different needs. We all have social batteries. We all burn out. It is what it is. But the way that I see events and Toronto DAO events, especially since they're happening monthly, it's like plugging in your phone into an outlet. Like you're coming in to recharge your mental kind of personal development, what you're doing, looking at other ideas, networking with people. So even if it's at least once a month, even for those people who are more on the introverted side, it allows you to connect with like-minded people, and you don't know what somebody is going to say, be it on the stage, be it from one of the speakers, or maybe the person who's grabbing a drink next to you. But that might be your aha moment, that might be your click in whatever journey you are on right now, be it building your own project or collaboration, or whether you are, at your 9 to 5, whatever next breakthrough you might get, that can come from the most unexpected source. And if you're plugged into a community which has monthly meetings, in-person meetings, which are so important in our day and age because everything's online, but if you come to the in-person meetings, you're just hitting so many different things that could be of benefit to you. Apart from the fact that it's a really cool vibe, really good community. I mean, we've I love how Samir's like, we're gonna put a comedian, we're gonna put a beatboxer, so it's definitely out of the normal business meeting kind of vibe, and I think it's a lot of fun. So what I think it does for the city is to keep that like monthly check-in and provide that space for people to come and hang out. And plus, like, the next one's at Art Gallery, the next one is going to be somewhere else, so you get to experience different parts of the city and keep yourself like, and I don't want to say it's like mental sharpness, but it's like getting yourself out there and being in the flow of energy and ideas, regardless of like what people believe in. Some people say everything's energy, so like plugging yourself in to outside of wherever you are, if that's like a long-winded answer, but it's so important.
Yeah, like for me, I always our events I'm always excited for, but sometimes I just don't feel like going, and I kind of force myself. And even like going out on Saturday night with my friends, for example, I'm like, ugh. But like once I feel like 90% of the work is just getting out of the house, and once you do that, it's just really good for, as you say, for my mental health and everything.
Yeah,
Just have to make that dive into the pool.
and I think the events are awesome because, yeah, like, and yours especially, like, I've been to other seminars and stuff. Like, the Toronto DAO community is just, yeah, there's something super special, and it's so lighthearted. Like, I'm gonna shout out Toronto DAO events, and I guess it's Samir, Athika, the group. I mean, it's a serious community, but it's also such a lighthearted and funny one. so,
Mhm.
so like that alone is awesome.
Yeah, especially since we have our own like internal core team events for like team building, which I find fun as well.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to another point, and I think we'll talk about, because you and I discussed, events and like the importance of participating, the importance of contributing, because sometimes you don't just need to be a spectator. You can come out and see what you can collaborate with, like what you can contribute with, and that could take you on a whole different, journey. You're always getting something out of it. So that's
So
it's exciting.
my if I don't move my mouse, it blacks out, and I'm always worried, do I cut out or not? So I feel like I need to mouse jiggle.
It's so funny.
Like,
I actually have to do that to my phone. I'm not used to not looking at anything or like have an in-person conference. I'm like just tapping my phone every few minutes. So Matthew, if I go on a tangent, just remind me of the question.
no problem. You haven't done a tangent yet. But
Okay,
like
good.
you and I have both mentioned, like, briefly talked about mental health. So like, how is, like, you've expressed that mental health to me in the past as a key part of your business plan. Like, can you elaborate on that?
Well, okay. So with Clubhouse, what I personally was looking to attain, I've always been interested in understanding the different aspects of addressing mental health, like for personal reasons and like I guess for our society. And I think we can all agree how important that is. And especially somebody like myself who has been around health and wellness my whole life since it's just the first thing I've ever done in life, even though I studied international relations, human rights, that kind of thing. So it's always been an interest of mine, but understanding kind of mental health from a social wellness perspective, that's very fascinating. It's very important because look, like the club, when people would ask, like, what does Clubhouse do or what I look to do in the future? It is addressing mental health through arts, fitness, and social events, but and here I'm going to sound technical, but like in a non-clinical way, because there's a lot of tools available out there, and we're blessed to live in Canada where people address mental health and understand the struggles we have, and there's a lot of tools available. However, a lot of us often struggle like at using those tools. Like we always joke about, like, well, it's not really a joke, we just mentioned, right? Like you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't make the horse drink. And if any of us struggle either with ADHD or self-sabotage, or we get stuck on certain things, or whatever upbringing was, like everybody fights their own battles. Some of the most successful people in the industry, or in the tech industry, overall industries, really, people have been able to think outside the box. They have been very vocal about their struggles with mental health. So sometimes they say, like, that's part of, I guess, the founders, right, or the genius in being able to kind of do things differently, but that comes at a cost. And of maybe not blending in, or maybe not handling, like you could be a perfectionist outside, but when you come home and it's a mess and you can't handle things, things like that, you start to feel down yourself, you start to doubt. Or if people have addictive personalities, there's like a whole variety of things that when we go outside, we present a certain way to the world, but the world that we live inside, or in our own household, or whether we live alone or with people, that, whether we like it or not, is shaping how we are outside. So there's so many forces at play. So what I wanted to do when or with my team, and I was blessed to work with some of the most amazing people I could ever meet in life, and I am so grateful for all of my friends and people that have helped me kind of shape this understanding and support me in my journey, because like this, and it's kind of, I'm almost at a loss for words, because like truly I do love my team, and everything we've been through. But the concept of third spaces, like whether you have your home and you go to work, but there's a social environment that are your friends, your family, your colleagues, like people you can hang out with, that's really the outlet. And often we're lacking that. We find ourselves in a place where everything's transactional. Like you have to go, for example, pay to go to a yoga class or this and that. And sometimes maybe that is a third space for somebody. Maybe that is a space where somebody can kind of break out their mold, recharge. But for most people, that becomes inaccessible, or it's not as fulfilling, maybe, because you go to a yoga class, you see your friends for 5 minutes, and then you're like, okay, everybody, bye, and everybody kind of presents well, but then they all go to their house, and then they're kind of going through their own thing, so what we found, and the reason we say through Clubhouse we wanted to address that social wellness component as mental health, because you almost need a space. Like, let's say you feel down, and like sometimes we have great days, and some days I can't use certain terminology, but some days are not very good, and you just literally want to go and hang out with your friends. Like, you think the movie the show Friends, where they just chill on the couch, and they were each other's like support. And it wasn't transactional. It wasn't like, you're gonna pay me for a conversation, or you're gonna pay me for this and that. Yeah, they paid for coffee, but they hung out. And that's almost like a lost art in some cultures. And here I'm gonna make a slight little parenthesis. And I know, Matthew, you've traveled through South America.
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela was listed as the happiest countries in the world for such a long time, despite being so economically challenged, right? Like struggling in a lot of aspects, but people maintained that, like, you can go and knock on your neighbor's door and be like, hey, let's have a beer. You don't need to schedule a Google meeting for that 3 weeks in advance. Do you know what I mean? The differences in society. So I guess what we were trying to bring back a little bit more of that, like, friendly social vibe, regardless
Well,
of somebody's wallet, kind of thing. That's what I meant to say.
what I always found that we did poorly here, and I think the Americans are just as guilty as this as the Canadians, is like we seem to have put a price tag on fun,
Yeah.
and that it's impossible to have fun unless we spend, let's say, $50. And that's not even like a grand old time. That's just like a so-so time. And it's just, whereas in Latin America, I felt like they could have fun with as little money as possible. They would be like, all right, we get paid next week, so we're all kind of broke this week. So what if we just like take the money we have out of our pockets, pool it together, buy a case of beer, and do YouTube karaoke tonight, you know? And I saw this like meme that I thought was like really funny, and it was in Spanish, so but it
Mhm.
it was
I'll translate, don't worry.
no, I won't say it in Spanish. I'll
Okay.
translate it. It was just like the party of the rich, and it was Trump and Musk doing their stupid dance that like they do to the YMCA in like their bow ties and just sort of like it barely moving, and it looked pretty boring party. And then it was like the party of the poor, and it was this guy like dancing as Santa Claus, like twerking while holding onto the railings of a window, and like the music blaring, and everyone's having a good time. And I'm just like, man, I don't care how rich I would be. Like, I want to go to that party, not the boring like $2,000 a plate dinner at Margo Largo or whatever the place called. And yeah, I always admired that, and I always thought they had a lot more fun despite having less money.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of community that I'm kind of referring to. Like if you think about it, when we were kids, like it's so much, and maybe I could be wrong, but it's a lot easier to become friends and have that friendship component when you're younger. But when you grow up, or when because I was looking to address like schools, mental health in the university, and then in when people start to have their career, there's so many different pressures, like do I fit in, or am I enough, or can I afford this, or there's a whole variety of factors at work, and often and I'll say it, a lot of it is in our head. Looking back now, you realize like even in university, you could have had a better time. It was just in your head. So how
Mhm.
do we feel comfortable or create a space comfortable enough for people to get out of their head? And then oh my God, sorry. I was gonna make a bad example, but like, remember Titanic? It's like and again, this is not a social critique, and I'm not a like a communist or anything, even though I was born in USSR. I always joke about this. But like feeling like relaxed, being let loose, and like going out into different communities, different spaces, and just like literally sometimes getting out of your house. And then you're gonna have the most fun. You're gonna, how like sometimes people like go, you'll have the best time. And people are like, I'm not sure, I don't know. And then they come back like, oh my God, it was the best. And then they'll find their tribe, they'll find their community. So it sounds so cliche, but that's kind of what
Yeah.
that is. And not be afraid to do it. So yeah, basically, I think that's like to address that as a business, it's a lot more challenging, right? So it's like, I think the question was like, in what way like that we were able to do that in our business. And I think the reason we called it Clubhouse is because it had a little bit of everything. You had or at least what we've proven in concept it through a physical space, right? Like we could have puppy yoga in the morning, which is a business in itself, and people would purchase tickets to come for the business, and that facilitated the work of that business, which we endorse through Clubhouse. But at the same time, in the evening there could be a club night, or prior to that it could be a wine and paint night, and different kind of experiences that somebody could come for one thing, but then they would see another thing advertised and be like, wait, you know what, I'll come out to the boot camp. So that's kind of what Clubhouse encapsulated, because we as creators were so different. Some of us were fitness trainers, some of us enjoy the social environment, setting up club events. Other people were more on how do we educate community and society, but like how do we pull all of our brains together to offer something to people who are looking for it. That's essentially what that was. And
Yeah.
in itself, that addresses mental health, because you are also being creative, and creativity is an outlet. So a lot of the reasons, and again, I'm not going to get clinical, but they say like if somebody's feeling depressed or down, that means we're not releasing, like sometimes art, painting, being expressive, being creative is a good outlet for that. So yeah.
I also remember like when COVID first started,
Oh yeah.
they kept saying like social distancing, and then a few months later they changed it. They changed it to physical distancing.
Yeah.
Because they really wanted to highlight, okay, like you can still socialize in different ways, but like still, stay apart, but still socialize. They really wanted to hit home that to still for your mental health, still socialize in any way you can during this pandemic. Just stay apart physically.
Yeah. That was a time to be studied in history books, because I think we'll feel, no, because our generations will feel that a lot more. Like I have a son who is 11, right? He was grade 1 when we moved during COVID, SK, senior kindergarten to grade 1. So essentially he missed so much of that school. And a lot of the little kids too, they had masks on their face, and then they weren't allowed to talk to other people. But how do we as society engage and learn from each other? Is through communication, watching people smile or touch or feel, those kind of things. So it's a really interesting social experiment to see a whole society of, I guess they're called Generation Alpha, that are literally every day now on Snapchat talking to each other. And God, I can't even believe what I'm hearing from these kids on my son's phone. They're doing their social conferences at night, like, and then they're playing Roblox at the same time on a different laptop. But at the same time, these are the same kids that didn't grow up playing in the mud and kind of throwing mud at each other, because their part was like, hey, you can't be close to each other. So it's very interesting to see what's going to happen in the future, and what framework and what things we need to set up to help them.
Well, a lot of people who are the anti-work from home group say you can't collaborate like you can in person. And that may or may not be true for our generation or later and above. But man, a good counter argument was seeing like these kids build on Minecraft when they're all on different computers in different places. They'll like all work together to build this like giant castle. Meanwhile, the one time I play Minecraft, I have the square house that
Yeah.
that the noobs do. That's as far as I got by myself. So it'll be interesting to see, will we see like a complete shift in the work from home again based on when these people join the workforce, right?
Well, it's interesting because there you touch on multiple things, and I guess addressing that through mental health, right? So if you look at like cartoons and movies and even the long form media that we grew up in, this current generation is pretty much, and I'm going to try not to be too blunt about it, but they're basically hooked on so short term flip. I didn't like the video, 2 seconds and boom, scroll up. I didn't like this video, boom, scroll up. The imagery changes every 2 minutes. So the attention, 2 seconds, sorry, 3 slides or so. So the attention span and the mental regulation, and here's again where I'm going to try to avoid being too technical on mental health, but the dopamine addiction is again going to be studied in the next few years, because it's like, well, how do you then have a conversation with a peer for more than 10 minutes? Like, can you be interested in speaking to somebody, or did your train of thought already, is somewhere else? So while there's benefits to that, there's a little bit of perils. And myself being like a millennial parent of a Gen Alpha, I'm looking at other parents who we were the ones that had access to social media, Facebook, Instagram, things like that. And then when we had kids, while I didn't let my child have an iPad until he was like 4 or something, the struggle is there. Like you're looking at parents who are exhausted, burned out, tired. You have to pay the bills. You have to be at your job. You have to multitask, especially through COVID. Like I have to be online conferences. My kid is whining in the corner. Here's an iPad, So since little, they've been babysat by technology, but now these kids are rewriting technology because they're the ones that are creating and thriving in it. However, and I'll speak for my own son, because like we moved a couple of schools, and then the irony was he's great at Clubhouse. He would talk and network with anybody. He can talk with any grown up. But when he was put in a community with his peers, he didn't even, I can't even say he had proper friends until last year. And he's 10 now, because it's like, well, because you're losing that sense of personal communication. You have great online communication, but when you're in person, that's a different story, right? So this is where I make a strong case for places like Clubhouse or Third Spaces, where they can be like not just sitting on Snapchat inside their rooms in their corners with parents being like, well, great, they're at home. They're not breaking their knees over a bike, for example. Most kids, some kids are lucky still to have the outside world, right? But a lot of kids are kind of stuck in that, but that's the future society. So, the mental health perils of that, like I said, is the attention span, the burnout from the computers, the burnout from conversations. Like if your friends are texting you every 2 seconds and you can't think, that's tough.
Yeah, when I'm working, I have to put my phone on silent, though. And I will say one thing about the iPad generation. I was obviously not raised on that generation. I'm too old for that, but I was raised on the pre-taped Sesame Seed. Sesame Street generation. So I mean, it's not there's, I would say that's ballpark-ish, you know? Instead
Mhm.
of an iPad, I had Sesame Street in front of the TV.
But you know, one thing that you had, the most interruptions you had in Sesame Street was commercials, and the camera
No, they
never
didn't have
moved.
commercials.
Exact. But look, the camera didn't move, and the colors, while they were bright, they were not targeted for marketing. Notice how much, like even Barney's purple because it's marketing. Now you have flip camera, like the imagery is changing. So there's is fascinating research on how the world has changed from when we were kids and we were watching like a stable, like there was no flip camera switching every 3 seconds, right? So now
Yeah.
even movies, you're watching action films because it's like almost a human need, otherwise you lose their attention and they're like, it's boring. Like even ABCs don't sound the same. But anyway, sorry, that's just like part of that current conversation. I'm not exactly a critic, but I do feel that we have to have like a mental wind down, and a lot of current society isn't focused on that, especially when it comes to kids. But that's like a separate conversation altogether. Looking into the future and seeing what kind of tools are our children going to need, or think of ourselves, right? Like what can we project for them in the future in terms of their social interaction? Because if people don't get that social wellness and they're maybe struggling going out and kind of living, because for a wholesome life you need to have a creative outlets, right? So is it okay for them to be only online, or can people function in a social environment in person?
No, it's a good point.
Hmm.
So you mentioned to me once that the role of volunteers is fundamental in creating communities. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Well, absolutely. And I think if when I say volunteers, it's like basically grassroots, like people who got together and just created that. Like at Clubhouse we had a lot of questions. Like we actually spoke to an investor once who I consider a friend, but at that point it's like, well, how did this come together? Like how did you guys do it? Because sometimes you have companies and you see that right now I see that happening, maybe even like with oh my god, why am I glitching? Oh my the app, oh shoot, Airbnb experiences, right? So there's a lot of places like, oh, now you could try this, now you could try that. There's a lot of or even like social events organized by large corporations where they're paying people money to run an event or maybe to recruit an event, versus an event that's being run or self-originated by community. And here's where we could talk about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, right? Why do we do something? So intrinsic is like that internal drive to create something or to put something together because it's your mission, it's what you believe in. Rain, shine, sleet, hail, thunderstorm, like people are gonna come out. Or there's the extrinsic motivation, like what are people going to get? Like you're gonna show up if you're paid an X amount per hour, or you're gonna get a reward at the end of it that's not just like a moral reward, right? So I find that volunteers are so indispensable because they're the ones, or people that are not paid to do something but they do it anyway, they're the ones that most reflect the current authentic community, if that makes sense, right? Because by the time corporations get to catch on a wave and have the funding to trickle it down and promote something within the community, they have to notice a trend, but the early volunteers, early adopters are the ones that are creating the trend, so to speak. So they cater to the community in a very genuine and organic way. So if businesses arise from that, that's perfect. But I feel like that is such an unrewarded or like the part that doesn't get spoken about, because half the things that we have today would not have worked out without the people that took their time and effort to put something together. Even Toronto DAO, for example, right? It's a community of people who are like-minded to create something for the community and for other people, and that is so beautiful. So
Yeah, we're
that's
all, for the record, we're all volunteers.
yeah, and you got to give it to that, because volunteering your time, it's a resource, right? It's a big resource, and it's for something, so whoever, like if you guys are listening, if we find that intrinsic motivation versus we need both, but the people that can cater to what their intrinsic motivation is, that's often, and I'm not going to say that, I would be speculating if I said that that leads to happiness, but people who are following their mission and are doing something because it makes them feel good to do, as opposed to being paid an X amount, that makes a difference. So basically, thank you to all the volunteers that are shaping the world out there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we've all done jobs that we just are strictly paycheck, and we couldn't care less about the outcome of whatever we're doing as long as it results in a check, right? But when you volunteer for something, I mean, you should care, right? That'd be kind of weird if you didn't care about the cause, yet you are volunteering your time for this. It'd be a waste of time.
But
This, of course, does not. Of course, has nothing to do with people who volunteer for communities for like education or court order purposes.
Funny you say, you can find your tribe, no matter what.
Yeah. So, how would you like to incorporate your in-person experience with Clubhouse into an online experience?
Well, witnessing what I got to see. So from an anthropological, so to speak, point of view, me and my business partner used to discuss this a lot, because when we would take turns like observing events that were held at Clubhouse, we were literally like, for anybody who studies society, we're like a fly on the wall. We got to see so many different events, different community events, ethnic events. Like we've hosted so many Ukrainian fundraisers at Clubhouse. We got to witness, like, there were events for Persian community. We did iftar. We did, for the Muslim community, we did events in support of various different projects. And it was just one of the most rewarding and beautiful things, to witness and to host, right? So, just, and again, not to get political, right? Like I studied political science, but under one roof, we had simultaneous events happening almost back to back that were for countries and communities that would normally right now not get along. But under that umbrella and under that kind of equal sort of respect, it was possible. So I would like to see that happen. Now, that was something beautiful we could witness in person. When we talk about turning it into kind of like an online experience, that is a more of a new frontier for me, because I realize and understand, and again, using my son's example, everything is online and the kids are thriving in that environment. So the way that I see online experience translate into what we used to do is mainly for connection and connecting the right people with the right businesses and the right sort of communities with venues or experience. Sorry, do you guys still hear me? I just had a call come in.
Oh, it hiccuped, but it
hiccuped. Okay, good. Okay, good. Yeah, so I would like to see, and this is basically what is in the works right now, is utilizing all of the experience that we've had and creating a way for people to interact and collaborate in a way that, again, honors that inclusivity, honors the respect and integrity, but at the same time, the focus towards mental health, social wellness, belonging, and putting it together into online platform that can help connect the right people, right? So that is what I would like to see happen in the next near future, and that will allow us access to so many different beautiful projects that happen all over the place. And I've always believed, and I think to answer this question, we always stand to win more by working together than competing with each other as a humanity.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That might be my world peace moment, but that's a strong conviction of mine. It's just, how do we work together to attain that?
Unless it's sports.
Listen, you're talking to a Russian who lives in Canada. You know what? Like, I've grown up wondering where my allegiance in hockey and Olympics lay, okay? And then I had to have Colombian children. So I'm very much concerned about sports when FIFA is playing. So I'm like, what do we wear? And I put multiple flags on my car, and people think I have an identity crisis. So trust me.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been fun during the Copa America, though.
It was, and I pride my, I'm actually very happy to celebrate diversity. So my kids are wondering why I'm like that, but we did our genetic test, and I'm like, you're 15% indigenous. They're like, it's not that they really not care, but to them it's like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, no, but you don't get it. This is so cool. You're like 4% Nigerian. We need to celebrate this. And they're like, Mom, just stop it. And I was like, no. So yeah.
Like, I can't imagine just going up to an actual Nigerian and being like, I'm 4% Nigerian.
Listen, my business partner, one of my business partner at Clubhouse, he's Nigerian, and we always joked about it. So as soon as I got our test results, I'm like, we're practically family. I know. It was, yeah, I think I was excited more than anybody. So yeah, you could say, yeah, the vibe was always fun. Because look, we all bleed the same color, and I think people forget that.
Unless you're sick, then you bleed a different color. Then you have
We're
another
not
issue.
talking about gangrene, okay? Or a flesh-eating disorder, okay? Matthew, let's reel it back in. This is on Final Destination. I think we're okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I would like to see things shape into an online platform where we could just do, more of what we used to do, just open it up to more people, and online will make it a lot easier. But we need to attract the right people to the project, and that's currently what I'm open to see, because you never know who you can meet. And like I said, even at Toronto DAO events, you don't know who can say something that can shape your vision differently, right? Or who we can meet that can help us facilitate whatever next project we're doing.
So you bring up a good point, and it kind of integrates into my next question. So, like, what sort of tech partnerships or any partnerships for that matter do you think are essential to building a true social wellness platform?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. It has so many different parts to it, because I like the word true social wellness platform, because I think that echoes our earlier conversation on whether something's intrinsic or extrinsic. Because any good person, and I'm going to be like idealist versus realist, any great pursuit can eventually become corrupt, as we've seen in governments, as we've seen in history. So as long as there's integrity towards the mission of like, what are we trying to attain? And everything, we live in a material world where everything, like, we all need to pay bills, we all need to create companies that can provide and facilitate for all of us, and hopefully everything's about evolution, right? And at which point we have to make sure that we keep the integrity, where and I'm going to be very frank. Like, as I mentioned earlier, how kids are right now the youngest consumers, right? Like, everything's flashing at them every 2 seconds. They're seeing ads all the time. They're trained to just kind of almost like pick certain colors over another color. So marketing is a major industry. Marketing is the industry that makes the world run, basically. Like, we can host events, we can, know what products to purchase. It's fair game. It is what it is. But as long as marketing does not interfere with the integrity of the corporation or the company or partnership or collaboration, then in my opinion, that is the true social wellness. Basically, as long as it is not hijacked by mercantilistic interests too much, where we can all develop something as a community, as a society, but not have it basically go into like a one pocket. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to be very like soft about it, because in terms of tech partnerships, it's so important, right? Like, that's, as long as it's recognized, like the purpose is recognized, as long as the project has the right backing, as long as the right players are at the table, and as long as we all collectively know what we're doing, right? And this is where I bring in like the work, for example, of KMH here. I've discussed and I'm still looking to potentially host an event together with KMH. But I love to see what people are doing now. There's fashion shows that are raising funds for mental health association and things like that. And you know what? Here, I'll actually give you an amazing example from Clubhouse, and it was one of our favorite events I've ever done. And we did it 2 years running, and unless the floor started whatever, we had the issues, we would have continued this partnership, and I'd like to resume in the future. So Buffer Festival which is a Toronto organization, right? They partnered with TikTok. So we're talking about tech, right? And Best Buy to provide computers, phones, and they brought in influencers for a 2-day event called Road to Freedom. The kids came from different indigenous reserves, some in Ontario. I think they're mostly from Ontario, if I am not mistaken. And for 2 days, they provided training, education. Like they took them on, like, this is how you edit, this is how you do. Oh, now we're going to take you near the CN Tower so you can make these pictures. We'll, have this like 2 million follower influencer show you how to cut that video, adjust it, so that kids can have representation of themselves in the community. And they're the ones that, have the wheel at their hands. You know what I mean? That is actually an amazing example of how tech partnerships and that level of integration can help the community, like in practical sense. And I loved hosting that at Clubhouse because it's just, you were witnessing magic. And I'm grateful to all those players, so it is possible. So if we were to do that at a larger scale, and I think lastly, to answer that question, with the amount of wealth that the tech industry has, or some of the wealthiest people in the world, most of global problems could be solved. And again, I sound like world peace pageant right now, but if we think about it really, not by simply providing food, but by providing like a redesign of a framework where people can have that ability to be better and provide for themselves.
That's really cool. And I remember I worked for a startup a few years back, and the thing about partnerships, it kind of allowed us to leverage each other's
Yeah.
capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it would be a tech partnership, whereas like at a certain point, like our goals were aligned. We were like, this part that we're doing is the same as this part or similar enough. We can kind of both work towards building that, or like we could leverage each other's like social media followers or markets and stuff like that. So I always thought I learned a lot from doing that.
That's exactly like you say it, because that's, you're essentially able to do more by like everybody doing what they are good at and assisting in areas that they need, and in terms of social wellness, I think we could do a study, but there's definitely a trend where people prefer authenticity right now. Like
Mm.
before it was all about things being polished, things about being kind of like correct. And now people almost in their soul, they're seeking this like imperfection almost, so they're and I say that to address the social wellness and mental health aspect. So if we have more interest by different players and in the tech industry that could help support that, the projects will be very successful. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's still some fake out there.
Oh,
There was a
absolutely.
reel that I saw where someone was caught at Walmart taking a picture of a racing controller for video games, but it was built by, I hadn't built it. Ferrari had their logo on it, and so the guy was just taking the close up of the picture of the Ferrari logo to act like he was driving a Ferrari.
Absolutely. But doesn't that tell you what's wrong with the world? Like
It
that's,
a lot. It tells us a
it
lot about
is.
what's wrong with
But
the world.
then if we were to understand the social struggle, because like I always like to think, how is that person when they go home? Like, are they okay? Like, you know what I mean? And this is not to pass judgment. This is just to see like there's a society that's growing up right now where we need to currently, us, this day and age, like this moment, we are responsible for creating or counterbalancing the challenges that have been created by this superficial, like I need to pretend I have a Ferrari society. Do you know what I mean? So if there's a leaning right now towards people saying, no, we want authentic, we want real, and we're sorry for the community that's like for people having to try to be more, like having to try to fake things, then we can ride kind of like the wind in the right direction and be like, no, we'll create a counterbalance to that, because that's the only way things are going to change, by investing and supporting kind of the different kind of discourse, different kind of community like focus.
I
That's
might
what I
judge
mean.
the guy who takes a picture of the Ferrari video game controller.
You might what?
I might judge the guy a little bit for taking a picture of the video game controller.
Look, if that helps him understand that maybe there's more. But if people, look, you are what you are exposed to. And this is what the world is currently being exposed to, because it's like, again, it all comes down to marketing. And here another thing, and again, I'm not anti-marketing, because marketing is fundamental. But like on this side of the world, you know, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but it's like since the 50s, people have been marketing comfort, utility. Here, get this new thing, get that, and then the things became disposable, right? So how do we display to people that there's other things, you know, and you can only learn through community, because that's the only way people have passed down evolutionary information to each other, you know, sitting in circles talking about stories from their past and things like that, you know, where it's like, how do we expose people to the fact that there's more than just whatever the next Jordans are? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a societal shift. So that's, you know, if I'm a small part of that mission, then let that be it, you know, because you wear the Jordans for 2 days and then you still feel down until you need to buy the next ones. And yet a kid with a soccer ball running, and by the way, I love soccer for that, my favorite sport, because all you need is a ball. You don't need fancy hockey equipment and things like that. That's a game that unites everybody, because you could be barefoot somewhere in wherever you just pictured, and you're happy playing that ball with your friends. But how do you encapsulate that feeling? Because those kids might be getting more of that natural dopamine, serotonin, joy, versus the kids here playing a video game in their new Jordans. Sorry, that's
Yeah,
my closing on that statement.
I'm not the biggest soccer fan, but I will have to give props to soccer on that you just need a ball as opposed to like $1,000 for hockey equipment.
Yeah. Again, it comes to inclusivity, right? So
So
that's an important part then.